Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Logan Glover, and today we're going to be giving you a quick rundown of everything that went on during week 3 of the NFL season. We're going to be talking power rankings, awards, we've got it all here, so stay tuned. To start us off, we're going to start with the MVP, the big one, the biggest award there is. So start at number 5, we've got Tyreek Hill. Receivers, they don't typically get up nominated for this award. But to be blunt, there has not been that many quarterbacks that have really impressed me so far, besides obviously the 2 on this list. No one else has really given out outstanding MVP numbers and carried their team to wins. So receivers, we got TJ Watt, we got Christian McCaffrey on these lists. We've got some non-quarterbacks on this list because I feel that they deserve the same recognition in some cases. And the first one is Tyreek Hill. He's been outstanding. I think it would be naive to say that Tua could do what he's doing without Tyreek Hill because I don't think he could. Tyreek Hill's a great deep threat for Tua. He's second in the league in yards with 412, first in the league in touchdowns. He's got catches, almost all the targets he gets, 25 catches on 35 yards. Very consistent receiver. And you know what you're getting. He's a great, speedy, deep ball threat, and he has been a presence in every game he has played this season. So I expect, as long as Tua is succeeding, Tyreek will be succeeding, and he'll find himself on lists such as these. Now, next up, we've got the next non-quarterback on this list, TJ Watt. And this is another case of, this is what MVP is, the most valuable player to their team. And again, it'd be naive to say that TJ Watt is not the most valuable player, one of the most valuable players to his team in the league, because without him, the Steelers, they'd be pretty much lost. That defense, it's great. That offense is very subpar. And without TJ Watt, though, that defense would really take a step down. They still got some solid playmakers. Cam Hayward's hurt right now. They still would have Mika Fitzpatrick. Alex Highsmith's been great. But TJ Watt draws so much attention from that defense and still is such a threat. And he's won them games. Like, he scored the game-winning touchdown against the Browns. He is the heart and soul of that team, of that defense. Without him, they wouldn't stand a chance in most games. I mean, 6 sacks leads the league. He's got a fumble recovery for a touchdown. He's got 2 forced fumbles, tied for the league lead. 11 tackles. He's done it all. He fills out the stat sheet every game. I mean, 5 TFLs, 12 QB hits. He's got 2 pass defenses. Like, this guy does it all. He's a jack of all trades. He has been amazing for the Steelers, and I could see him getting some actual serious consideration down the line if the Steelers have a successful season for this award. Next up, I mean, it wouldn't be an MVP list without this guy on it. Patrick Mahomes. Did you really expect him not to be here? Chiefs are 2-1. Slow start week 1, but he's really turned it around. 803 yards, 7 tutties, only 2 picks. Very efficient work from Patrick Mahomes. 65% completion percentage. So, I mean, he's Patrick Mahomes, man. The Chiefs are doing well. Patrick Mahomes is doing well. As soon as he got Travis Kelce back on the lineup, he looked like his old self again. He had his safety net. I don't think there's much more that needs to be said about this guy. He is just the best quarterback in the league. So he's going to find himself on MVP lists as long as the Chiefs keep doing well. Next up, these are the number 2 on the list, Christian McCaffrey. It's tough to pick out an MVP on a team like the Niners because they are such a good team. But McCaffrey has been their best player. He has put the team, I wouldn't say on his back because, again, it's a very talented team, talented defense, talented offense. But McCaffrey's been the best player on the team. Nick Bosa hasn't been the greatest so far this season. You've got guys like Fred Warner. Brock Purdy's great, but for being real with his talent, he is more of a game manager-esque quarterback. That's sort of his role, and he does it very well. He's a very good, safe, pocket-passing quarterback. Doesn't do anything special. Not going to make any mistakes, though. Christian McCaffrey, though, he does tons special. This guy has been the best running back in the league. 353 yards leads the league. 3 touchdowns, 1 in each game this season. And he gets it done in the receiving game too. We know this. We've known this for years when it comes to Christian McCaffrey. 11 catches, 70 yards. So he's a jack of all trades. And in that 49ers offense, they use him so many different ways, and it works. It works for him. So he has been an absolute monster this season, which is why he's number 2 on this list. But number 1, Tua Tagovailoa. Tyreek Hill was at number 5. You expected Tua to be on this list somewhere. He has been just as good as he was last year to start of the season. It It was disappointing to see how his season ended last year, but he's putting up another great performance so far to start this season. And this Dolphins offense looks absolutely unstoppable. And as hate him or love him or hate him, you got to acknowledge he is in large part a reason why. That's why he's on the MVP list. 3-0 record. Winning matters when it comes to MVP. That's why a guy like Kirk Cousins doesn't find himself on this list, because his team's 0-3 despite him putting up great numbers. 1,024 passing yards, 8 touchdowns, only 2 picks. He's been very, very, very good. He's the highest touchdown percentage in the league in terms of how many of his throws are touchdowns, 7.9%. That's an obscene amount. He led the league in that category last year too with only 6.3, so that puts into perspective the 7.9, how crazy that is. But this Dolphins offense as a whole just looks unstoppable. I mean, they just romped the Broncos last week, 70-20. Not many teams can say they've dropped a 70 bomb on anyone. This Dolphins offense, they have. And Tua looks great so far. His deep ball looks good. He's reading the field really well. He just looks like a very, very, very good quarterback. And the Dolphins, they look almost unbeatable. So Tua, he finds himself at number 1 on the MVP list. All right, now moving on to our Offensive Player of the Year power rankings. We're starting out with a guy I mentioned on the last list as a guy having great stats, but not the wins to back it up. But that doesn't matter in the Offensive Player of the Year voting. It just matters your numbers. And Kirk Cousins has had great numbers. Leads the league in passing yards, in passing touchdowns, completions, attempts. He's been so good, averaging 358 yards per game, 1,075 passing yards a season, 9 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. Very, very good numbers for him so far this season. And I got to be honest, you look at the Vikings team, their offense, some of the guys on their defense, you wonder how this team is 0-3. It's not Kirk Cousins' fault. He has been spectacular to start the year. They've got other issues they need to sort out. But Kirk Cousins, he's been an offensive dynamo, and that's what it takes to be on a list like this. Wins do not matter when it comes to Offensive Player of the Year. Next up, we've got Keenan Allen, a guy you kind of be surprised to see on a list like that at his age, the way his career has gone. He's just been a very steady, consistent top 10 receiver for his entire career. That's sort of just been the role he's played. He had some injury troubles last year, but this year he's been fully healthy, and he's been really good. And he topped it off with a great game last week. That was the monster performance that sort of launched him onto this list. This season, he's got 32 catches on 39 targets, 402 yards, 2 touchdowns through the air, and he also had a huge 40-yard bomb to Mike Williams for a touchdown in the last game. Doing it all. He's throwing the ball. He's receiving the ball. But yeah, he has been great. They're going to need him to continue to step up big time with Mike Williams now out for the season with a torn ACL. But I expect with the way he's been performing, I don't expect his numbers to change. I don't expect him to slow down anytime soon. He's looking very good so far, which is why he finds himself at number 4 on the list. Number 3, a guy we already talked about, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, yeah, I already mentioned him. He's been a great runner, great through the air as a running back. So he's really done it all. There's not much we need to say about him. We already talked about him on the MVP voting. Same goes here for Tyreek Hill. As mentioned, great numbers, 25 catches, 412 yards, 4 touchdowns. He's been fantastic. There's just not much more to say than what I already brought up. So again, as said, the reason he finds himself a little bit higher on this list than he did on the MVP list is because as a receiver, it's hard for you to be the most valuable part of your team, because without the quarterback, you wouldn't be as valuable per se, which is why Tua doesn't find himself on this list and was number 1 on that list, because Tua hasn't been putting up as good numbers as Kirk Cousins has, who is number 5 on this list and the only quarterback, and that sort of takes away from it. I think the Offensive Player of the Year award is more designed towards running backs, receivers, those type of players, as opposed to the quarterbacks. Because, let's be honest, there's a little bit of quarterback bias when it comes to the MVP. So it's nice to see the other offensive players getting their stuff shown for the Offensive Player of the Year. And number 1 on this list is Justin Jefferson. Jefferson, he's been amazing again. What more is there to say with this guy? What did we expect? Did we expect anything less? No. He has led the league in receiving yards, 458 receiving yards, 25 catches, 38 targets. He only has 1 touchdown, which is a little bit low for him, but he's not that kind of, that's not his role. Making tons of catches, getting tons of yards. He's moving the ball on offense for this Vikings team, but they do struggle to finish it sometimes. Might be a reaon why they are 0-3, but as I mentioned, record does not matter when Offensive Player of the Year voting. If you're putting up great numbers on a bad team, I'm still putting you on consideration for this type of a list. Just about your numbers. And his numbers, they have been excellent so far. Justin Jefferson, right now, for me, he's the favorite to repeat in the Offensive Player of the Year award. Now we're going to move on to the Defensive Player of the Year award. Defensive Player of the Year, it's such a tough award to really judge because you got so many different players playing so many different roles, trying to do so many different things. But this is my best attempt at putting this list together. Number 5, we got Jesse Bates, new addition to the Atlanta Falcons defense, and he has lived up to the paycheck he earned last offseason. 3 pass defenses, a forced fumble, leads the league with 3 interceptions this season, 24 tackles too. He's been very, very good defensively as a safety. Lots of defenses, lots of tackles, lots of picks. He's doing everything you need a safety to do. He's been great so far to start the season. The one thing to note, and sort of the reason I have him a little bit lower, is he has been allowing a 58% completion percentage and has allowed 7 catches for 76 yards. Not terrible, only 12 targets, not terrible. He's not getting targeted a ton. That's sort of the way it is with a safety. But the 58% completion percentage, the 76 yards, it is a bit of a knock. That's part of the reason why it's so hard for cornerbacks and defensive backs to win this award, because every little mistake they had is put under the microscope because of how impactful it can be. Whereas when a defensive end makes a mistake, it's a little bit harder to tell sometimes because it doesn't always result in a big play. But that's sort of just a knock on corners and safeties as it is. There's not really a way around it. But Jesse Bates, he's still been good enough for me to find himself at number 5 on this list. Number 4, Myles Garrett. It's kind of amazing how he hasn't won this award already. He's only number 4 this year, but he is such an elite pass rusher. He has been since he entered the league, and he's been great to start out this season. 4.5 sacks, 8 tackles, a forced fumble, 4 TFLs, and 10 QB hits so far this season. He's just a game wrecker off that edge. And this Browns defense as a whole has been amazing, led by him. The defensive front taking a huge step up this year. Defense as a whole has been shutting down offenses week in, week out. Myles Garrett is great, and if he keeps this up, he could rise up on this list as the season continues. Now, Micah Parsons, the jack of all trades, the Swiss Army knife on defense. He's been more edge-focused this year as opposed to previous years for the Cowboys. And he's put up great numbers so far. 4 sacks, 12 tackles, 8 QB hits, 5 tackles for loss. He's got a pass knockdown. He's got a forced fumble. He's got a fumble recovery. So he's really doing a lot all over the field for the Cowboys once again. Was kind of quiet in their last matchup against the Cardinals, which is kind of why he fell a little bit on this list. But you can't knock what he did in the first 2 weeks. He looked absolutely unstoppable. I think he'll be a contender for this award for the entire season. And it's expected he'll be a contender for this award for many, many more years on the line because it's only his 3rd season in the NFL, only 24 years old. The sky is the limit for this kid. He looks like a stud, and he's been absolutely amazing this year. I expect to see him on this list down the road. Next up at number 2, we've got another Minnesota Viking in the Player of the Year talks, and that's Danielle Hunter. He's been great, and again, this is what I was talking about with the Vikings. Kirk's been amazing. Jefferson's been amazing. Danielle Hunter is having a career year so far on that defensive end. He's been absolutely amazing. He's got 5 sacks, second in the league, 19 tackles, leads the league in tackles for loss with 7. He's got 4 QB hits. He's got a pass knockdown. He's got a forced fumble. He's doing it all. I mean, so yeah, he's got 5 sacks this year in 3 games. Last season, he had 10.5 in 17 games. His career high, he did in back-to-back seasons with 14.5 in 16 games, both those seasons. He's on pace to shatter his personal best in sacks. He's been an absolute monster for the Vikings, and it just raises more questions. Why does this team suck? Why are they 0-3? But that's definitely, again, not a knock on Danielle Hunter. Record does not matter in these talks. He has been great so far. And the number 1 in Defensive Player of the Year voting for me personally is TJ Watt. I mean, I had him on the MVP list, so there's no shocker he's on this list too. As mentioned previously, 6 sacks, a forced fumble, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, 1 fumble recovery touchdown, 11 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 12 QB hits, 2 pass defenses. What more can you ask for out of your anyone on your defense, man? He's doing it all. He looks amazing as usual for TJ Watt. Again, most valuable player on that Pittsburgh Steelers team by a mile. He has been the best defensive player in the league by a pretty large margin so far this year because he's doing it all. A lot of these guys, they got picks like Jesse Bates. They got sacks like Danielle Hunter. They've got tackles for loss like Parsons and Garrett. Pass defenses like Parsons. TJ Watt does it all. He's got the forced fumbles. He's got the touchdowns. He's got the fumble recoveries, the sacks, the TFLs, the QB hits, the pass defenses. He does it all. There's nothing this guy can't do. He's number one on Defensive Player of the Year voting for me. It really would not shock me if he wins it once again for the second time in his career. All right, now let's talk rookies. We've got first up is the Offensive Rookie of the Year voting, and there's some great offensive rookies this year. These guys so far have been off to great starts to their career. Starting with number 5, Zay Flowers. As a Ravens fan, I love this guy. Zay Flowers is so much fun to watch, and as he gets more comfortable with the offense, I only expect his production to go up from here. He looks so phenomenal. When he gets the ball in his hand, he's so dynamic. Him and Tyreek Hill are the only two receivers with 5+ missed tackles forced this season, so that should tell you what type of player Zay Flowers is. 21 receptions on 25 targets, 188 yards. Hasn't gotten in the end zone yet. He came close against the Bengals in week 2. Couldn't seal the deal, but he looks phenomenal. The Ravens are making a point of it to get him involved in the offense, get him the ball in any way they can. He's even got 4 rushing attempts, only 17 yards on a couple jet sweeps. But yeah, they throw to him on screens. They have designed plays set up for him. They love this guy, and they are trying to get him the ball. And as he gets more familiar, as he gets more comfortable with that NFL style, that speed, that aggressiveness, I think he will continue to skyrocket. And the sky's the limit for this guy. I think he could. The skill set he has is like very comparable to Tyreek Hill. I don't think he's going to be Tyreek Hill by any means. That's a bit of a high bar to set for such a young receiver. But he's the type of guy that he's a speedy, deep threat. He can get, when he gets the ball in his hands with open space, good luck tackling him. So I expect him to continue to be on this great trajectory to start off this season. At number 2, we've got Tank Dell. Tank Dell has really broken onto the scene in the last 2 games with 2 big performances offensively. I talked about it a little bit earlier in the fantasy football side of things, but 15 receptions, 20 on 21 targets, 251 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's looked very good, and he's only seemed to be getting better as the weeks go on. He's made some great deep throw catches. He had a great catch in the last week's game against the Jaguars. Great double covered deep ball. Didn't matter. Tank Dell came down with it. He's a small guy, but you could not tell that in the way he plays. He's very physical, but just like Zay Flowers, very fast, got great hands. These 2 receivers are both studs and will be future receiver ones in their rooms, without a doubt in my mind. They both look amazing to start out the year. That's why Tank Dell's number 4. Number 3 is a guy that a lot of people probably expected to be number 1 at the start of the year, Bijan Robinson. And this isn't a knock on Bijan that he's not at number 1. He has been amazing. He's been Bijan Robinson. 39 rushing attempts, 213 yards. In the receiving game, he's got 14 catches on 17 targets, 102 yards, and a touchdown. So he's been really good. The Falcons' offense doesn't allow for a ton of players to just go off. But Bijan Robinson has done his best with what the cards he's been dealt. He's looked very, very good. It is a run-heavy offense, so Bijan does get a lot of carries. But as I mentioned, they balance it out. Tyler Algier gets his carries. They do try to throw it a little bit here and there. But either way, with the carries and the workload Bijan has gotten, he's been amazing, averaging 5.5 yards a carry. He looks great. I think, again, it's another case. A lot of these rookies so far, it's only week 3. So most of these guys, I would expect them to get even better from here. I don't see a lot of these guys this isn't the ceiling for this season for a lot of these guys. They will continue to improve, continue to get more comfortable, and their numbers should go up as the season goes along. Number 2 on the list is CJ Stroud. I gotta be honest, I was not expecting to have him on any lists like this at this point in the season, at any point in the season, because I like CJ Stroud, but he was put into a tough spot in that Houston Texans roster. Not a lot to work with there, but he's made the best of it. There were, all those reports about his Wonderlic tests, how he had some very, very poor scores, but he's shown that he can process the offense very well. He's been going through his progressions at an elite level so far. He's been very safe with the football. That's a key thing to note when it comes to rookie quarterbacks is their ball security. C.J. Stroud has not thrown a pick yet. He's one of, I believe, 3 quarterbacks to have thrown for over 900 yards in their first 3 games. He's got 906 yards. The only others to do it are Herbert and Cam Newton, 2 quarterbacks who were amazing in their rookie seasons. Stroud also has 4 touchdowns. He's got a 64% completion percentage. He's been very good this year. And again, like I mentioned, a limited weapons to work with. I mean, Dameon Pierce had a bit of a down year. They haven't been able to rely on him very much, partially due to the fact that their O-line is extremely beat up. They're missing 4 starters. They're missing Laremy Tunsil, the stud of that offensive line, for the last 2 weeks now. So he's missing a lot of weapons. It has not stopped him. He's been working very well with the weapons he's been given. He's had some great connections with Robert Woods, Nico Collins, and of course Tank Dell. He's looked very good to start of the year, and the Texans look like they might have their guy in C.J. Stroud. And then number 1 on the list is still Puka Nacua. Didn't have the best week against the Bengals last week because I feel like teams have started to dial in. Maybe they should be covering this guy because he looks really good. 30 catches on 42 targets, 338 yards, no touchdowns yet, but yeah, he's been amazing. We've all heard about him. He's breaking records. He had the most catches in a rookie's first 3 career games, and that was after his second game. He has been almost force-fed the ball, and this is something Matthew Stafford's kind of been known to do. When he finds a guy he likes, he gets him the ball. Cooper Kupp, Calvin Johnson. Even he made Kenny Golladay a $40 million man when he went to the Giants. So Matt Stafford loves getting the ball in the hands of his number 1 targets, and he's been doing that all season so far with Puka Nacua, who has looked very good. Kind of an unknown name coming out of TCU, or not TCU, coming out of college, but yeah, he's really broke onto the scene and has been very, very impressive so far this season. Now we'll move on to the final award rankings of this video, the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. Jumping right into it at number 5, we've got Jalen Carter, a guy who slipped in the draft due to a poor combine, some character concerns, all that sort of stuff. And of course, he fell to the Eagles. He couldn't have fallen into a better position, and it's shown so far this season. He's been very good. Again, this is one thing to note with why he's sort of a little bit lower on this list and why he kind of will remain a little bit lower on this list for the duration of the season, unless he does something sensational, is because this is a great Eagles defensive line, which means he's not getting a ton of the looks from the offensive line. He's not the center of attention. As a lot of these other guys on this list, they are the center of attention. It's sort of a comparable to Chase Young in his rookie season. Chase Young had Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, and Montez Sweat on his defensive line with him, so they weren't solely focusing on Chase Young, which led to him getting better stats. Not a knock on the player, just sort of something to consider when ranking these types of players is when they have a better defensive line around them, they're not going to be as prominently defended against by the offensive line. You know, this Eagles defensive line, we know how good it is. It's elite. But Jalen Carter, no knock on him. He has been great to start the year and leads the league in forced fumbles with 2, tied for that league lead. He's got 1.5 sacks. He's got 5 tackles, 2 TFLs, 2 QB hits, getting in the backfield, getting hits on the quarterback, getting that pressure. So, I mean, what more can you ask for? He looks pretty solid so far from that interior defensive line. And there's not much more there is to him. He's been very good. He's a very powerful, just going to bull rush through you, get to that quarterback. And he's done that quite a bit to start this year. And again, as he works his way into more and more reps with this Eagles D-line, his numbers will continue to improve as the season goes on. Number 4 on this list is a guy who is probably getting 100% of the attention from the offensive line of the other team. That's Will Anderson, because there's not much else going on the Texans D-line. Couple solid pieces. But despite that, Will Anderson, he's been great. It hasn't slowed him down much. He's got 13 tackles, 1 TFL, 5 QB hits, and a sack, and he had a crazy blocked kick in the last game against the Jaguars, just burst through the line, got his hands up, got on that football. That's a great, great defensive play. You love to see these rookies stepping up on the special teams game, and Will Anderson has done that. Anywhere he's needed to be, he's been there. So he's been great to start the year, and again, another guy I think as his pass rush arsenal continues to adapt to the NFL level, he will continue to improve. His numbers will get better from here. He looks like he's going to be a stud defensive lineman. At number 3 on this list, we've got Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions. He made his presence felt game 1 of the season against the Chiefs with that huge pick 6, and he's looked really good since then. He hasn't really slowed down much. Still only 1 interception, but he's got 3 pass defenses. He's got 18 tackles and 3 TFLs. He's been all over the field for the Lions. He's been a great safety for them, kind of doing that jack of all trades. He's played down in the slot. He's played up near the line, getting into the backfield. Sort of done it all so far, and he's done it all pretty well. He's been a very, very good to start the year. And one thing, again, we're going to go back to this with all the corners and defensive backs that we go to in this list. He's more advanced numbers, 17 completions, or 11 completions on 17 targets, a 64% completion percentage allowed, but he's only allowed 50 yards on 11 completions. That's very, very solid. I mean, yes, you'd like to get those completions knocked down a little bit, that completion percentage, the targets, all that knocked down a little bit. But the fact that of those 11 completions, he's only allowed 50 yards, very good. It shows how good of a tackler this guy is. You may get the catch, but you're not going very far afterwards. He is going to bring you down fast. So Brian Branch, he comes in at number 3 on the list. Number 2, another defensive back, Christian Gonzalez. Another guy who fell on draft day. And I gotta be honest, I have no idea why. I loved Christian Gonzalez coming out of Oregon. He was my cornerback 1 in that draft, but he fell to the Patriots, and he's been great. They've gotten a great cornerback number 1, future cornerback number 1 on their team. He's got a pick. He's got 3 pass defenses. He's got a sack even, 1 TFL. He's got a QB hit and 16 tackles. So this guy's been all over the field. He's been pretty locked down. I had him a little bit higher on this. I actually originally had him at number 1. Because when you watch the Patriots game, they're always talking about how good Gonzalez has been, but they weren't sort of showing the surrounding numbers, and that is, once again, completion percentage when targeted, which is 70% for him. He's been targeted 30 times. You kind of want to bring that down as a cornerback. He's allowed 21 completions, 216 yards on those completions. That's why he finds himself at 2 and not 1. But this is sort of stuff to be expected from a rookie cornerback. You can't expect them to come in perfectly, but he did a pretty good job of shutting down Garrett Wilson last week. He's faced Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle the week before that. He's had some tough matchups, and he's done pretty well. I mean, even week 1, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So, and again, like I said, he's had some lapse in coverages at times, but for the most part, he's been very, very good, especially for a rookie cornerback, but not good enough to be number 1 on this list. That goes to Christian Izien, who has been amazing. Who would have thought? Undrafted free agent that Todd Bowles went out. He knew him from previous coaching roles. He had they had a past relationship, and he wanted this guy. Went out, signed him after the draft, and it's paid off huge for them. He's got 2 picks already. He's got 2 pass defenses. He's got 15 tackles and a tackle for loss. He has been great. And the big thing with him, which is why he's number 1 on this list, is those numbers, those advanced numbers you look at. He's only been targeted 12 times this season, with only allowing 9 completions and 67 yards allowed. That is great stuff. Great stuff for a rookie cornerback. The less you're targeted, you don't get as many pass deflections or as many interceptions, but the less you're targeted, that means they don't want to look your way. That means, yes, we could throw to you and you could get a pick, but the coverage is so locked down, the quarterback just turns away. And that's the big difference between Christian Izien's stats and Christian Gonzalez's numbers, where Gonzalez has almost 3 times as many targets as Izien, which shows that Gonzalez has been great. He's making plays on balls. He's getting some good tackles. He's doing all that stuff. But when the quarterback is going through his progressions and he sees the guy that Gonzalez is covering, he feels confident enough to throw that ball into the gap that he's given. With Izien, he doesn't have that. He most of the time, the quarterback is not feeling comfortable, so they go to the next progression. Izien looks great so far. Again, as mentioned, only 12 targets. It's great stuff for a rookie cornerback. And it looks like the Bucs might have a gem on their hand, as the undrafted free agent has been spectacular to start the year. And now let's move on to power rankings. So this is my first iteration of the power rankings on this channel. I'm going to be trying to upload these videos weekly, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on the rankings this week, but week through week, I'll go into more in-depth onto the rankings on who's moved up, who's moved down. But this is just the first iteration, so there's no movement so far, but I will talk about some teams to note. We're going to start at the bottom here. The Broncos and Bears, they played each other this week. They both looked abysmal. No questions really there. It's going to be a terrible football game, and I would not recommend watching, especially because it's at 1 p.m. You got plenty of other options, but those 2 teams have looked abysmal. The Texans, 30, they've looked much better with that win against Jacksonville. Also, so they've looked pretty solid to start of the year, a little bit better than people expected. The Carolina Panthers, a little underwhelming so far. Bryce Young's taken a little bit to get his feet under him, but that'll come. But still, they are 0-3. They don't look great so far. The Cardinals, they've surprised some people, beating the Cowboys, only beating the Cowboys, nearly beating the Giants, put up a good performance against them. So they got some heart to them. They've been surprising people, which is why they're at 28 on the list, but they've been pretty good. Again, I'm just going to kind of breeze through. I'm going to skip through a couple teams. If you want me to answer some questions about your team, leave it down in the comments. I'll be sure to answer any question marks you have on if your team's too low, too high. Let me know. I'll give you my thoughts a little bit more in depth there. And as I mentioned, week to week, I'll be going a little bit more in depth into these because there'll be more changes and fluctuations through the rankings. Moving on, we'll move up a little bit to the Jets here. They're such a tough team because they're so talented, but Zach Wilson sucks. That's as bluntly as you can put it. Zach Wilson is not a good quarterback, so they got to find themselves this low. They just haven't been able to get their offense going with him under the helm. We got the Steelers at 20. They are 2-1. They have been a little bit surprising to me, but again, you can't ignore how bad that offense looks. They've looked very questionable. At times, the offensive play calling is still questionable under Matt Canada. Najee Harris looks slow. Kenny Pickett's had some lapses, but the defense is elite. But I'm going to just keep them at 20 because I just don't feel like the supporting cast around guys like TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick is good enough to propel them higher in these rankings. The Minnesota Vikings are at 18, despite being 0-3. But again, this team is it's such a weird team to rank. 0-3, all in one-score games, unlike last year where they were 11-0 in one-score games. So they've kept it close. They haven't been getting blown out of the water. They've been playing some solid teams. It's just something's not been clicking for them. The running game's been a little bit questionable with Alexander Madison. The cornerback group is the biggest weakness on that team. It has been suspect to start the year. Really, they have not been very good. So really, it's finding that defense. The offense is pretty good. They can rely on not having a running game. But yeah, it's sort of just putting all the pieces together for them to get some wins, which is why they may be 0-3, but I do think they're not a bad 0-3 team. I think they're a better 0-3 team. They're better than some of these teams that are 2-1 and 1-2 due to their schedules and all that sort of stuff. So I do think that the Vikings, I'm cutting them a little bit of slack because of how good they were last year and how the numbers show for a lot of their top players that they should be higher. Their record should be better than it is. They just need to close out some of those games like they were last year, but I think it will come in time for the Vikings. And now we'll move on to the top half of the rankings, starting off the New Orleans Saints. Without Derek Carr, I don't know how good this team is going to be for those couple weeks he might miss, but they've looked pretty solid to start the year. The Rams, they looked surprisingly good to start the first 2 weeks, but a very underwhelming performance against the Bengals last week and injured Joe Burrow, and they couldn't really capitalize. Why I had them sort of slipping down a little bit to the bottom of the top half of the league in these rankings. Packers, Jordan Love has looked really, really good so far. The Packers just can't. If you're a Lions fan or a Bears fan, you can't catch a break. The Packers, as far as from what we've seen, Jordan Love looks like he has the potential to be a solid franchise quarterback for these guys. He could be their guy of the future. A little too early to say right now, but the Packers, they know how to draft quarterbacks. Next up, the Chargers. They're 1-2, but just like the Vikings, who they played last week, they've looked better than that. Their numbers say they're better than that. And I think it's another case of just closing out games. But for them, I think the issue is a little bit easier to pinpoint. The issue is Brandon Staley. He is not a good coach. The fact that he made it through the offseason after blowing a 28-0 first quarter lead in the playoffs is the biggest mystery in all of sports, because there was already question marks about him being on the hot seat, all that sort of stuff. And that, to me, that should have been the last nail in the coffin for him. But he's still there, and it's not working. They did have a win last week against the Vikings. They looked pretty solid there, but losing Mike Williams, who knows where this team is headed. But you can't ignore the talent on that roster. So that's why they're at number 13. The Browns is maybe a little bit high for some people, but I do believe they're a pretty solid team. That defense looks amazing to start the year. Deshaun Watson still is shaking off rust. He's still a little questionable at times, and the loss of Nick Chubb is going to hurt them. But the O-line is great. Jerome Ford's looked pretty solid. Bringing in Kareem Hunt's good. Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore. They got pieces on offense to work with. I think this Browns team has looked pretty good so far. Then the Detroit Lions, 2-1. They lost a nail right to the finish against the Seahawks in week 2. Lost that game, but they beat the Falcons pretty well last week. Beat the Chiefs week 1. They look pretty talented so far, and Dan Campbell seems to be a pretty good coach. We'll jump up to the Bengals here. The Bengals, they've been underwhelming 1-2 performance. I think it was a mistake to start Joe Burrow at the start of the season. They should have let him fully recover because it's showing now, and it could linger throughout the rest of the season. But they did get the win last week, and Burrow proved he could do it even with the bad calf and all. Still think it's a bit of a questionable decision. Their defense does look a little suspect at times. The Ravens kind of embarrassed their defense, to be totally blunt about it, and they locked down their offense. So they do have some question marks, and they do have to sort of get their things get rolling. But the Bengals started out 0-2 last year, so you can't count them out. They're still at number 9 on this list. Then we've got the next 3 teams are all teams who I had higher on the list heading into the week and dropped due to embarrassing poor performances against not very good teams. The Jaguars lost to the Texans. The Texans have done pretty well against the Jaguars. They split games in that series, in the divisional series. I think it's 8 years in a row now that the Texans have split a game with the Jaguars, so maybe they have their number. But again, you can't be losing to teams like the Texans. The Cowboys, that was an embarrassing performance against the Cardinals. They knocked me out of my survivor pool at school here. Picked the Cowboys to win this week, to move on to next week. But no, the Cowboys, they were disappointing. They were very, very bad. And Dak Prescott showed his usual flaws, some bad decision-making. They could not capitalize in the red zone. Their red zone offense was horrific. They had multiple drives inside the 10 and the 5-yard line and kept getting field goals or getting stuffed on 4th down. And on that last drive, that pick that Dak threw was just bad. That's what the stuff that Dak Prescott's been trying to get out of his game and just hasn't been able to. Throwing in a triple coverage on 4th down in the end zone. Like, what are you doing? He had the flat open, didn't hit it. Regardless, the Cowboys bumped them down. They looked really impressive against the New York teams. Looked embarrassing against the Cardinals. And the Ravens, they had, I would say, the least embarrassing loss against the Colts. They took it to overtime. The Colts are a better team than the Texans and the Cardinals are. But still, that's not a good loss. But it's a case of the Ravens kind of beat themselves. Too many penalties, miscues on offense, some misplays. There were some bad penalty calls, but the Ravens sort of beat themselves. The defense was underwhelming. The defense was great, sorry. The offense was underwhelming. They couldn't really get anything going. The defense forced multiple stops in overtime, and the offense proceeded to leave them out to dry. Couldn't get anything going. Kyle Hamilton, though, for the Ravens on the defense, looks amazing, 3 sacks. But again, they still lost. That bumps them down a couple spots. The Bills, they've seen to bounce back from their week 1 loss. They looked amazing against that Commanders team. That's why the Commanders are a little bit lower on this list. I always suspected they were a little bit fraudulent, beating the Cardinals and the Broncos, 2 of the worst teams in the league. They really got shown up by the Bills. That defense just destroyed Sam Howell. They had forced 4 interceptions, and the offense was great. So the Bills seem to have their groove going a little bit. Josh Allen seems to be comfortable. Stephon Diggs, all their stars seem to be going and trending in the right direction. The Eagles, they seem to continue they're steadily improving under their new offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson. It looked, their offense a little rough week 1 against the Patriots, but it's definitely gotten better. The team as a whole has gotten a little bit more comfortable after losing 2 coordinators. A 3-0 start's pretty good. So the Eagles still find themselves high on this list. The Chiefs are the Chiefs. They're number 3. They look fantastic. The Dolphins are number 2 for me. Maybe most people have them at number 1, but you can't knock the offense. It looks amazing. I still do have questions about the defense because the Broncos suck, let's be honest, and the offense was destroying them. But the Broncos still put up 20 points, which isn't terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible, which is kind of a lost afterthought in an absolutely demolishing game. But I do still have questions about the defense after losing Jalen Ramsey before the season started. So their offense is amazing, but will it last? Because it didn't last last season. Will it last this season? And number 1 is the 49ers for me because they are the most well-rounded team. They have an elite defense. They have an elite offense. They've got a great coach. They've got great coordinators as usual. San Francisco seems to pump out defensive and offensive coordinators like crazy. I mean, they haven't lost a step after losing their D coordinator, DeMeco Ryans, to the Texans. Kyle Shanahan's a mastermind coach. And that team really doesn't have any holes. The O-line's great. Brock Purdy's been solid. McCaffrey, the receivers, the defense is one of the best in the league. I think it is the best in the league. So the Niners are great. And if they don't get bit by the injury bug like they normally do, they could go all the way this year. So that is it for my power ranking. That's going to be it for this video today. Thank you all for watching so much. If there's anything you want me to throw in next week's video, anything you want me to change, any suggestions, leave them down in the comments. And also be sure to follow me on Instagram, on LGlove Sports. I'm posting a bunch of stuff there that sometimes doesn't get to YouTube because it's just quick, short form content. Also, in the coming weeks, I am going to be coming out with weekly NHL videos once their season starts to be going. And these, the NFL and NHL videos will both be coming out weekly. So if you have any thoughts, any questions, leave them down in the comments. I'll be sure to answer. Thank you all for watching.